let's try and get into the mental side of staying awake for that long, running under fatigue, when
Yeah,
sleep running comes into it, hallucinations. I think people really, because you do hit a wall at some point,
yeah,
and that's when everyone quits because it's those uncomfortable positions
yeah,
that people don't like to get in. And it's easier to just stop than to just, okay, this is happening, let's go. So
yeah,
what have your experiences been with that? And
yeah,
what is your advice on giving to someone to get through those positions they put themselves in?
yeah. Like, fantastic question. We said we're only going to talk for an hour, right? We can talk for an hour. We might have to extend a little bit. Okay, there's a lot of different moving parts here. The first race I did in 2013 was a 300K single stage race. And it was my sort of first long ultra. I'd run about 60K races before, but I'd never ran anything long. And there was no campsites, there's nothing. It's like 3, 2, 1, go. And you've got 90 hours to get to the end. Now, 90 hours is like 3.5 days or whatever it is,
Yeah.
like it's quite a long time. And I was a real rookie. I didn't really know anything about ultra running. I'd never hallucinated before. I'd never used recreational drugs, just didn't find it very interesting in my youth. And I got to a point where I did start to hallucinate. And luckily, I was with my running partner. We chose to run it together. And you shit yourself. You
Yeah.
absolutely shit yourself because none of us expected it to happen. And you obviously, I think because of the general DNA of ultra runners, we're quite tough to a certain extent. We're also quite weak in other areas, but we don't. And when you start to hallucinate, you don't really know what's going on, so you don't want to believe it's happening. And I sort of jumped back and I was like, what's that? And my mate's like, what's wrong with you? And I was like, nothing. And he just sort of like, obviously. And what I'd actually seen, guys, was like this tree, almost like this bush behind me here, like this kid was coming out of it. And I'm just going, fuck, I'm sure I just saw a kid coming out of that bush. And anyway, you just keep on trucking it up, you're just running along, running along. So at the start, and this is why, like, it's quite frightening that it's happening. And it's a symbol that you're losing control of your mind due to fatigue. So you're so fatigued, your mind is starting to do things of its own. You're visually starting to see things, which I'm really glad I had that experience, because when I coach people now, I'm able to prepare them for that to happen. And I've done some research into hallucinations and these kind of things, like, kids coming out of plants and this kind of stuff, and not being able to judge light and distance are, shall we say, quite normal characteristics of it. So when I put people in races now that they're going to incorporate a lot of sleep deprivation, we prepare them and we can say, this is what you're going to see. This is what we want you to do. And the number one thing, and this is what I say, like, I developed a problem-solving scenario called the Ultra Mindset, which a lot of the time when we have problems as human beings, our first reaction is to deny that there's actually something wrong. And we're like, like I just said there, my mate said, what's wrong with you? Nothing. And we just carried on running, and I was a perfect example of it, and we don't want to believe it. We don't want to believe that because no one wants to fail. Like, genuinely, no one wants to fail. So we don't want to believe it's happening. So we deny it. Now, you can't avoid or pass through sleep deprivation through denial. Like, it just doesn't. And so many things, they just don't go away. And this is the same. This is basically a similar conversation. If you've got if you've got an issue with a relationship, denying that you've got that issue with that relationship is not going to solve it. You have to admit that there's a problem. You have to really address that problem. And that's why the first point I share with people from the Ultra Mindset is just admit that you've got a problem. And this is where, like, in sleep deprivation, stopping before it's almost like when you're doing threshold work. If I push you too far in the red, then I can't bring you back to do more efforts. I have to let you have a prolonged time to recover. So you can look at sleep deprivation almost like threshold work. If you go too deep in the red, you're not coming out of it. And so what we have to do is we have to play this line, just like we do in threshold work. We have to play this line, and a good coach will get you through. If it's 5 1K efforts at threshold with a 1 minute recovery, a good coach will be able to get you through that on the right pacing. If you've been told the wrong pacing, after effort 3, you'll drop off the cliff and your graph will go down and you'll run effort 4 and 5 at like 6 minutes a K. It's exactly the same with sleep deprivation. So if when you get those first signs of sleep deprivation or hallucination, you've got a decision-making mechanism prepared to counteract it, which is something as simple as rest for 10 minutes.
Yep.
But in that moment, that sounds so counterintuitive. It's like, I'm going to let this guy go past me in the race, so I'm going to do this. And no, it's fine, And this is where I think it applies so often in life, is that we've got a goal, we've got to get from A to B. We're just going to keep trucking it up and trucking it up and truck it. It's sometimes like watching England play rugby against the All Blacks. And all they do is go one out from the ruck. And it's like, yeah, there's still no hole there. There's still, it's a knock on. You know what I mean? It's just like, let's move it wider. But this is the problem, is that we're so aggressively goal orientated that we're not willing to just pull back a little bit, and admit that we've got this problem and then figure out what we can do to get over it. And sometimes that might be a little bit of sleep. Now, from a physiological standpoint, like, this is what we have to respect as well, is that human beings, we're animals, and we function based on circadian rhythm, which is day and night.
Yes.
So if I ask you to stay up for 40 hours, I'm asking you to go against what's completely natural for you. So there's no wonder that the human body is starting to reject it.
Yep.
And there is going to come this tipping point where you basically crack. How we train that often is we get people and we'll practice micro napping. So we can, and this is the same as my example of threshold training. If I keep you on the edge, but I don't let you go over, and I train you like that a lot, then that edge goes a little bit higher each time. And it's quite similar to sort of sleep deprivation as well from some standpoints. From some standpoints, it's completely different. But if we train micronapping, like we've got an event coming up towards the end of the year, which is a 300K run, and we're training 6-hour run blocks with a 2-hour rest so that we can complete that in about 2 days. That's kind of 2.5 days is the time we're trying to finish this 300K. But if we don't practice that, and if we don't respect that actually we're going to enter these levels of fatigue, then we're setting ourselves up for failure. And I think that's one of the biggest things as well, is that just because you can run 5K, it doesn't always mean that you can run 5K 50 times back to back. It needs a little bit more sort of respect, and it also needs a little bit more science behind it and proper coaching. One of the things that we see, sorry, this is quite a long-winded answer, but I try and keep everything
it's good.
A little bit in context. The other thing that we see is what you spoke about there, Corey, is like the mental side to it. So a lot of people say, okay, how do you continue to push when you're sleep deprived, when you're in a varying amount of pain? And I've got quite clear views on pain that no one really knows what it is. There's some tests that have been done that, we can figure out people's tolerance to certain levels of pain, such as being in ice cold water or touching something very hot. I can prove that I have a higher tolerance to pain if we measure -5 as being a good measure of tolerance to pain, and I can stay in it for 6 minutes and you can only stay in it for 4, or vice versa. Does that makes my pain threshold in that particular activity superior to yours? But how does that transfer to, you know, when I bust my ankle running down a mountain? And so it's kind of interesting like that. But people will say, well, how do you develop this mental toughness? Well, the mental toughness is not actually doing yourself injury. It's being in a position of, how can I say it, of discomfort that you know is again on that line of tolerance, is not going to push you over. Because sometimes as well, if you have, let's say if you have a bad hamstring, you tear a hamstring in any sport that you do in training, and you take, depending on the tear, if it's a medium level tear, you take 3 straight weeks off. And you eat well and you recover well, there's a very good chance that in 3 weeks you can now run again. But if you try and run again in a week, then you're going to have a problem. So there's certain physiological things that no matter how mentally tough you are, when that hamstring is torn, it needs time to repair.
Yeah.
The other side of it is that people are mentally weak and they're entering events that they don't care about. They think they want to finish, but they don't. It sounds cool.
Yeah.
And the more, I know you guys have been around this, especially like our English and Australian culture is the same. Most of these ideas start in the pub with the lads.
Yeah.
You know, and it's sometimes 1 beer in and it's sometimes a lot more beers in, but it's like, you know, one of my mates that is an incredible ultra runner. He started his ultra running career as a bet in a pub, you know? So it's sort of like that. Is that really, when you're in an incredible amount of pain, when you think back to why you started it, and your answer is, well, it was with a bet with John down the pub. Well, fuck this shit. John wins. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's a little, mental resilience is again, it's a huge topic. It's something we can train, and again, we could talk about that for hours. But it's not. It's a combination of these things coming together, of being realistic about the situation, understanding your motivation, and then understand these sort of lines of essentially no return. And we're having, as coaches and as athletes, we want to sit as close to that red line as we can in many areas of our life, because that's increasing stress. And what we're trying to do here is we're training our tolerance to stress and our response as human beings to stress levels, but we don't want to push people over. There's certain points in a race where you can push over, but again, if it's a 200K race and you go over in the first 100K, then you're really going to struggle for the last 100K. So I know that that's not a super concise answer, but I try and give quite a sort of global and so that people understand that it's not always just one thing. There's a lot of different things here that we have to respect.
Yeah.
But the bottom line that we have to respect is understanding really how the human body works, because it's quite complex. And sometimes we don't give it, you know, like, oh, I'm tired. Mate, shut the fuck up, keep going. Like, sometimes that's it. You know, and sometimes that's not the wrong answer. And that's I would say that's probably one of the key components of having a good coach, is really understanding. And now, of course, because we have so much data, we can understand from the data if the athlete is actually tired.
Yeah.
You know, and because with the platforms that we use and the data that we collect, it gives us all of that data. So we can actually see in an athlete when they're going to come into a period of trouble before it actually arrives, which is, you know, that's super cool as well.
It's incredible.
So yeah, there's a number of different moving parts on it.